Hey everybody, welcome to my studio. This is Kris. In this short video, I'm going to paint a value study of these 3 brown eggs. This is the final picture there, and here's the final painting on my easel. For this painting, I used a single pigment. This is Mijello Mission Gold Red Brown. Really beautiful reddish brown pigment. You can see it there in my palette. And here's a nice big puddle of the paint all ready for me on my palette. Let's get started. Here's my reference image that I'm using today. You could use this. I'll put a link in the description below, or you could simply get your own 3 eggs and put them out on the tabletop. I think it's best to paint from life whenever possible. Here's an actual sketch in graphite that I did of this composition. I think it's also helpful to sketch out your work prior to painting it. Doing a full-on value sketch like this can be very helpful, allowing you to see your subject really well. Okay, here I am. Now starting to transfer my sketch and my composition to my watercolor paper. I'm using 140-pound Arches cold press paper, and I'm just carefully looking at my subject and transferring it as a line drawing to the paper. I typically do not trace my subject or my composition to my paper. I do have an LED panel that I could use to trace, but I used to use it more. But honestly, I've become convinced that my improvement in drawing skills are directly linked to my improvement in my watercolor. So I have decided to not trace my work very much anymore, and I'm drawing everything. Drawing it here on the watercolor paper from scratch, but also even doing a preliminary value sketch beforehand. Okay, I've got my red-brown, Mijello Mission Gold red-brown. Again, this is a value study done with a single pigment, and I've mixed up a pretty big batch of this pigment on my palette, and now I'm using my, I think this is my Degato 6 professional squirrel hair brush. I have another video about these brushes. If you'd like to look at my channel and watch that, learn a bit more. Squirrel hair is one of the best types of bristles for watercolor. Holds a lot of water and also holds a pretty good tip or point. So it's a great kind of brush for watercolor. I've gone ahead and put in, using a darker value, the background, and now I've mixed in a bit more water into my pigment, and I've lightened it just slightly to do the foreground and the shadow area of the 3 eggs. The only areas that I left, obviously, without any pigment there were these areas of highlight on the top of the eggs. Now, I did come in, and I'm putting a little bit of pigment over the entirety of the egg, as you see I'm doing right now. There's very little of the paper that doesn't have paint on it, but now I've just cleaned off my brush, and it's wet, slightly wet, damp brush, but with no pigment on it, and I'm just coming in and lifting the pigments there. The reason I did that was I was starting to see that I was getting some pretty hard lines. The egg on the far left, you can see, does have a very prominent hard line edge there, about halfway down the egg. And I was trying to avoid that. I started seeing that happen, so I came in and put some pigment over the entirety of the egg, and then to try to kind of get rid of that hard edge, and then lift it, try to smooth it out. Worked pretty well on the 2 eggs on the right, but it didn't work real great on that left egg. So I decided to now address that first, and coming in now with a much heavier pigment because, again, the shadow side of that egg on the bottom and basically the bottom part of the egg. And so now, by putting that heavier pigment in, I basically just solved my problem. I had that hard edge I didn't like, and so by bringing in some darker value, some heavier pigment, basically covered up that hard edge that I had there. And so really was able to solve that problem. This happens all the time when you're painting in watercolor. You get a hard edge where you don't want it. You get a bloom of color where you don't want it, a cauliflower we call it. And try not to freak out when that happens. Notice it and address it, but don't freak out. Quite often you can solve problems as they occur with watercolor. Those happy little mistakes. And can come by lifting the paint, where if it went where you didn't want it to go. So you can come in and lift it. You can soften an edge by bringing in a damp brush or a wet brush and soften that edge. If it's too hard, you can cover up with darker value an area where you had problems. So there's a lot of different things you can do, and it's really watercolors. Really all about understanding the medium and understanding the techniques as you go along, and just really that only comes through practice. So that's one reason why I really encourage these value studies, because you have eliminated one of the variables that can be difficult in painting, and that is color. Trying to decide what color to put here and what color to put there. And sometimes by using color, you focus on the color and you ignore the value. And value is more important than color in any painting. And if you have the right color but you have the wrong value, it really won't play very well. You won't get the shape, you won't get the sense of depth that you're looking for. See how this is a good case in point. Look, I've just added this really dark value in the cast shadow of these eggs, and now it's a really dark value. Okay, value is the relative lightness and darkness of the composition, and up until the point I put those cast shadows in, the whole painting had kind of a real similar value. Okay, kind of a real medium value. There was a couple highlight areas, but other than that, it was pretty much all the same value. Well, it was boring, it was flat. So as soon as I took some really dark value and created those cast shadows, all of a sudden the eggs now pop off the paper. They emerge from the paper, and I can see shape now. I can see form. And the only way you can create shape and form is through the proper use of values. Gradations of color to create this, in this case, these nice round eggs. Well, you have to identify the shadow side, identify the highlight side, find the core shadow, which I'm doing right now, for example, on this one egg on the left. The core shadow is where it's basically that line of shadow that separates the light side from the dark side. And it's usually the darkest part of the shadow on the shape. And so I'm emphasizing that, and I'm putting a lot of dark value in there. I'm going to end up, not making that quite as, so you can see how I lifted some of that color. It was a little too much of a sudden change from dark to light. So I was kind of smoothing that out a bit. So it's really, that left egg is now really starting to look like an egg, okay? And you can see how I have a variety of values from dark, dark, dark in that cast shadow to kind of a medium value there in the core shadow, and then gradually up towards the highlight at the top of the egg. So I'm going to repeat that same process now with the middle egg. This was a challenging composition because it's hard enough to accurately create this shape through the use of the different values. It's hard enough to do that with one egg, but now to do it 3 times, to repeat it 3 times, it just was challenging. You're just having to repeat those steps, those processes. But it's a really good exercise. Still lifes like this. This is why your art teacher in 6th grade or high school, whatever, used to make you do still life paintings. Maybe you thought it was boring. I think I did. I didn't understand, why are we doing these pieces of fruit, or why are we painting these cubes and spheres. Well, they're just the building blocks of understanding how to paint any shape, and get the values right, and get the shadows right, and get the form right. And practicing with basic shapes, still life, is really just practice. Once you know how to do that, you can do it with any shape, with any subject matter, with any composition. And so I highly encourage you to just get out a still life, get out objects from around your house. Start with simple ones. That's why fruit is good, eggs are good, because they're very simple shapes. Set them up on your table. Put a nice bright light on them so you can create a nice strong singular shadow. You don't want a whole bunch of shadows going different ways. So get a nice single light source and light them well. And then do value studies first. Actually, first, just sketch them with pencil. And then once you start to learn how to capture the shape and form just with pencil, then do these value studies in watercolor. Super helpful. Really great exercises. Then, once you do that, and you do that a bunch, not just once, but you really get good at it, then, start to introduce color. And once you know how to do all of this with just a single pigment, a single color, then you're ready to move on to doing it with a variety of colors. Famous saying I heard once from a art teacher, is that color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. The work of creating shapes is really done through the proper use of values. And so I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. Think value more than you're thinking about the colors. It'll help you a lot. Okay, I've decided now to darken the background, again, because I want a variety of values in the painting, and I felt like the eggs were too close in value to the background. And that since the top of the eggs are white with the highlights along the top edge of the eggs, I wanted to have a nice strong contrast between that white highlight and the background. So I wanted to darken the background. So I mixed up a big puddle of darker value, and I'm just coming in here now. And again, I'm using a pretty big brush. I think this is a number 6. Might be my Oku quill brushes. And I think they're a synthetic blend of squirrel synthetic blend. Anyways, whole lot of water. I have a pretty good tip. One of the things I always tell my students is always use the biggest brush possible. You might think, wow, that's a really big brush for trying to paint around those little areas. Well, it's a pretty big area that I'm trying to do a wash in, right? That whole area at the top. Oops, I have an alarm going off. Let me turn that off. Sorry about that. Little alarm going off, my bad. But I wanted to use a pretty big brush because I was doing this big wash for the background. So I didn't want some tiny little brush. But then once I got going, and putting down the wash, then I was trying to also work into these areas between the eggs. Well, that's why these big bellied brushes, like these quill brushes that I have here, combined with a nice point, are really great brushes because they give you the benefits of a lot of water, a lot of pigment that you can hold because they have a big belly, meaning the center of the brush bristles, but they also have a nice tip. And so they're just great brushes. I have a couple of videos on my YouTube channel that explain the different brushes that I use and the ones I like. I've been on a real quest to try to find the best brushes that I can, and I've created some videos about that. So if you're interested, so there you go. So I'm not really liking how this is turning out right now. At this point, I'm a little kind of freaking out a little bit because I'm having a hard time. I put down a wash, and I put more pigment along the top of the paper in the background than I did along the edges of the eggs. So now I'm coming back with more pigment on the brush and kind of redoing some of this background. And again, I could almost use a bigger brush, I think, here. It would have probably been helpful. I ended up getting kind of this wave pattern in the background. But once it dried, it just kind of looked like a piece of fabric or just on something abstract in the background. It turned out fine. But I was kind of struggling with it a little bit there at this point. But, you know, I don't think you ever get so accomplished with any medium in art that you don't at times, you know, run up against a struggle or a problem like I did here. And it's just a matter of not freaking out and figuring out, okay, what can I do now at this point? Understanding the medium well enough to know what you can do to solve your problem. You know, can I lift? Can I blend? Can I add more pigment? Can I, you know, soften an edge? Or sometimes the best thing to do is just walk away. Just stop and let it dry and see what you get, because it often changes quite a bit as you let it dry. So I'm going to go ahead and add my signature to the lower right of this painting. Again, this is a monochromatic painting, single pigment, Mijello Mission Gold, red brown. And so I'm just using some more of that same color and adding my signature there in the bottom. And it's finished. Again, it's not quite dry yet. The background's wet, but once it dries, I'm going to take the tape off and we'll be done. Okay, so here the painting is completely dry, and I'm going to take off the tape and call it done. If you found this video to be helpful, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I'm a person trying to learn how to paint in watercolor and be and really improve. And I've been doing it for 2 years. I feel like I've improved a lot over that time. I know I've improved a lot. And so I'm just really sharing my journey with other people. So if you like my style, if you find my videos helpful, then go ahead and jump into the community, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you're notified every time I add a new video, which is about once a week. And go ahead and maybe add some comments below, there in the comments area below the video. Let me know what kinds of things you're struggling with, what you want to learn, what videos you might find helpful. I'm really interested in creating a community of people that are learning watercolor together. So thanks for watching. See you next time.